Welcome to Living on Purpose Minipod. I'm Mark Pumphrey along with my co-host Dr. Kristie Stewart, and you know what? Today we're going to talk about those Vikings.
Love the Vikings.
I know, and then when you were over there, you found out that they only had 4 laws that they really abide by. And I found this really interesting because, when I think of Vikings, I think of these big burly men, or women, however you want to do it, have these big clubs, big beards. They would go out and conquer. You think of them as savages, but they really were sophisticated, and they broke it down to these 4 laws, right?
That's a stereotypical view of what we have on as Vikings, right? They were killers and, went out and pilferaged and killed people, and that is true. The men and women were fighters, and they did in fact do that. But at the core, they were really farmers. That was their main core. If you watch the show, The Vikings on the History Channel, it does a really good job of Ragnar Lothbrok of explaining that was the main reason why they went out. One, they wanted the adventure, but they were farmers and they needed more farmland because of growth, right? Because they had gotten too many people and they were not able to feed them. So yes, they were very progressive at the time. That's one thing that a lot of people don't know, especially women's rights. They were very, very progressive, especially at the time. Women could own land. Women could divorce their husbands. Women could even kill their husbands under certain conditions that was legal under the law. And they could be chieftains. So
now, what is a chieftain?
A chieftain is kind of like a king. They were kings later. They kind of evolved from chieftains to kings, but they were the leaders of their tribe or their village or whatever. Women actually were rulers. Women were actually
so they
fighters.
could actually rule and make decisions and I guess enforce the 4 laws, right?
That's right. Again, I spent over 2 months in Norway and Iceland. I learned a lot about this while I was there because they really embraced their Viking history. It's interesting that of the 4 laws, they were not written down, at least in the beginning. They were dictated by a person who would actually memorize them, and that was their job. They actually implemented and had kind of their judge and jury were on a week-long party that they called the Thing. And it happened once a year, and people came from all over to their thing, right, to their big party, and that's when they really implemented their laws. Anybody who had disputes with another person would get resolved at this point. The chieftain would make the rules and make judgments like a judge today would do. And
so their court was basically a party.
Yeah, there was a lot of alcohol in their court, right?
So they celebrated a thing.
They did. That's what it was called. But basically, again, they were farmers. They were boat builders. Later, they were church builders. If anybody's not familiar with the Stave Church, look it up on YouTube or look it up on. They are very interesting. They were, when Vikings converted to Christianity, they became church builders. And they're very distinctive. There's 28 of them left, and they're quite interesting. I was going to say, you
will not mistake that for any other type of church. I can guarantee you that.
That's right. But the biggest thing was they were very progressive as far as women's rights at the time, in the time period of which they lived, as opposed to Europeans were really taking away rights of women. The Vikings were very, very progressive in that, and allowing them to be landowners and so forth.
And obviously chiefs.
And chieftains, yes, they were chieftains. Now, there is a bit of historic dispute if women actually went into combat or if they went into the raids. That's pretty much been dispelled because recently, just in the last few months, they have proven that there was a burial that they had found years ago. It was a great warrior buried with all of their weaponry and things, and they just had assumed it was a male. It was definitely a chieftain because it had the swords and it had all of those things that royalty kind of would have. They have deemed it that it is in fact a female. Really? It is definitely true that women went into battle and women fought alongside the men in the raids. Interesting. But yes, there are 4 basic Viking laws. And I think that people are going to be surprised if they come back and listen to the entire podcast. These 4 are things that, one, we talk about week after week in our show, but they're also things that we as a society, culturally, I think we strive for. Most people strive for these 4 basic values, if you will, and through history. So 1,000 years ago, they were fighting for the same causes that we are fighting for today.
I agree. I think broke it down to these 4 things. So let's just jump right on to number 1, shall we?
Okay, number 1, and know that there's 4 of them, but they do have subpoints. So we'll cover some, but we're not going to cover all of them. So the full podcast, we go into detail on all of them. But number 1 is be brave and aggressive.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you can put yourself out there and make that happen, I mean, that takes bravery.
It's really part of our culture, right? If you want it, you got to go get it. The American dream is you have to go out and you have to strive, and if you work hard enough, you can be anything.
That's right.
Their first on the Be Brave was to be direct. Yes, you right. You got to tell people what you want. You got to tell people what you need.
Yep, and you want that to be given to you as well, right?
Right, exactly. I think that you want people to be direct and honest with you, because that was a big thing. The 2 priorities that they held, they hated liars and cheats. That was a big thing of their culture.
Well,
they hated liars and cheats.
Unless you're one, then you...
Yeah, but they hated liars and cheats. So being direct was pretty important. One of the other subpoints on Be Brave and Aggressive was grabbing all opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to see those opportunities first, though. I think
them.
that's part of it. And for them, that was a little bit harder than it even is for us today.
Some of these things you could use today in everything that you do or don't do.
I think we should.
Like, don't plan everything in detail. Let it be able to flow in and out,
Right.
be able to pivot.
Right. You have to build in flexibility.
You got to build in flexibility.
You want to plan and you want to work your plan, but you can't make it so specific that any opportunity, good thing, or any kind of contingency that you would need to put in place, if you are so rigid in your plan, you're not going to be able to go with the wind and kind of follow the opportunities as they come along, right?
Yep. So, before we move on to number 2, I did want to bring this point up that they put in here, use top quality weapons. So in being brave and aggressive, always use top quality weapons. So use top quality, whatever you're using in today, right?
Right. Well, today it could be your education, it could be whatever your strength is, whether you're a good communicator.
Right.
It could be your staff, you're having a good staff.
Mm-hmm.
It could be taking time off.
Right.
To retool, reprogram your brain, recharge yourself. That could definitely be something in your tool belt that you have to do. So yeah, that use top quality weapons means different things today. It's not that you have the biggest, baddest sword, but it means
may meant that at that time, but
right. But today it means what do you have in your tool belt?
Yep.
What are your strengths? How are you going to maximize those strengths, minimize those weaknesses for your success?
Well, let's look at number 2 real quick. Be prepared. So I think that this could be used for any part of your life. If you're prepared, you're able to handle about anything.
Right. For them, it was, keep their weapons in good shape and keep themselves in good shape. One of the things was agree on important points.
Yeah.
That's one thing we talk about. You want to surround yourself in this life with people that are different than you from a personality standpoint, but you don't really want to separate yourself from values, right? If you surround yourself with people that have the same core values that you do, even if your personality is different, you're going to be successful.
Well, let's look at number 3. Be a good merchant. I think this speaks for itself. You got to get out there. You got to give the people what they want, but you got to be able to be good at what it is, right? I mean, you can't just simply...
Well, and this means a lot more for our capitalist society than some of the other parts of the world, but one of the points on this is don't promise what you can't keep. Yes. Yep. Be a person of your word.
Yep.
Right? If you can't deliver, don't make the promise. And if you've already made the promise, either find a way to deliver or go be direct and be honest and work with them on figuring out an alternative. Don't just let it fall through the cracks and hope that it goes away. That ruins your credibility and just makes you a dishonest person, I think. 4 is keep the camp in order.
Yeah.
Right, and that makes sense.
Keep your house in order. Keep your work life in order. Keep your life in order.
And it said one of the points on this one was make sure that everybody does useful work. That doesn't mean that everybody does the same amount of work or the same kind of work. You really have to find in your people, whether it be your personal life, your kids, your wife, your brother, your ailing parents, find ways that they can be useful. Because if they're useful, they feel useful and they know that you value them, even though those things change over time of what useful, how we define it, they're going to be participatory in your life, Allow them to also make decisions. Don't randomly just make all the decisions for your entire family, and find ways that people feel useful. That's your job. And if you're an employer and you've got employees that work for you, that is your job.
That is your job.
It is your job.
Well, if you want to listen to the complete podcast, go to indieairradio.com or click the link below and go to our Living on Purpose page. That way you can listen to the whole podcast, right?
Yep.
And to listen to our podcast every Wednesday at 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern Time, just go to IndieAirRadio.com. And you know what? Don't forget to live every day of your life
On purpose.
on purpose.